Welcome to this IWA Lichfield branch webinar, replacing what was originally to have been a real meeting. And we welcome tonight members of Warwickshire, Birmingham and North Staffordshire branches, as well as members of the Heritage Advisory Panel. Let me introduce our speaker. Kate Langley will be known to some of you from her 4 years as part of CRT's restoration team. But she also has a background with English Heritage, and for the past 3 years has been Heritage Advisor in the West Midlands. Kate is talking to this evening about canals and the historic conservation in the West Midlands. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Phil, and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to run through canals and their historic conservation in the West Midlands. So I'm just going to go through a brief introduction as to who Canal River Trust are, what we do, and then the history of the waterways, again, very briefly, because we've only got 45 minutes for the presentation itself. And then we're going to be looking at waterway heritage, so a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to some of the sites you're no doubt familiar with when you're out and about on the waterways. And then we're going to think about how we actually look after that. So some of the tools we use and looking at that via a few examples, including the Roundhouse in Birmingham, and then what it might look like going forward for the trust and some of the plans we've got in the pipeline. And then there'll be a bit of time for a Q&A at the end as well. So Canal River Trust, who are we? So we were formed in 2012 and we essentially replaced British Waterways. We're a wellbeing charity, and when we were formed, we were one of the largest charities in the UK. We care for 2,000 miles of historic waterways across England and Wales. And you can see this map here that shows the extent of the network. We're funded by property, business, the government grants, licensing through boat fees, fishermen licenses, marinas. We're reliant on public donations as well and friends that we have. So there's quite a lot of things that go into the pot that help to fund us. And one of our charitable objectives is to protect and conserve heritage. So it's very important to us that the works we do are appropriate and are the best that they can be for looking after heritage. So just a bit of an idea of some of the heritage assets we're talking about. So just some lovely bollards on the GU there, some locks, we've got aqueducts, we've got multiple bridges, as I'm sure you know, lovely bits of cast iron gates, etc., wrought iron gates on the network. So, you know, there's a real multitude of listed assets and non-designated assets as well when you're out and about on the waterways. A little milepost as well, just hidden there behind all the ferns. So just some quick facts for you then. So this is just thinking about what we've got across England and Wales. So we've got 2,694 listed buildings that we own and manage and need to look after in the right way. We've got 49 scheduled monuments. We have 303 conservation areas. So for those of you that aren't familiar, conservation areas are receive extra care in planning applications, and they're areas designated by local councils that are of special significance and character that we want to try and preserve. And we have 36 which are linear, which means they are canal specific, so Trent and Mersey, great swathes of that are conservation area. The same with the Cauldon, the same with the Staffs and Worcester. So we have lots of instances of that as well. We have 52 historic parks and gardens that we run through with our canals, 9 historic battlefields we run through, 5 World Heritage Sites and 3 national parks. So being as we're kind of IWA Lichfield and surrounding branches, we're very much in the West Midlands, and that's what I cover. So I just thought I'd put a slide together focusing on the West Midlands in terms of what we've got. So you can see here this map. The red area is the West Midlands. So we've got Stoke, Calden, across over into Wales, all the way down right into Birmingham, and then stretching down to Stourport, etc. We've got the Grand Union. So it's a really big patch. We've got lots of waterways and a lot to take care of, essentially. So 900 kilometres of canal fall in the West Midlands region. We have 10 scheduled monuments. We have 780 listed buildings, 77 conservation areas, and 1 World Heritage Site. So the image next to the map here is the Ponte Silti. I'm sure I've not pronounced that right, apologies. This is the aqueduct. It's a World Heritage Site along with Chirk Tunnel. And then here we've got an example of one of our conservation areas. This is Warwick Bar Conservation Area in Digbeth, Birmingham. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of the broader region. So I said I'd do the history very briefly. So just to go through the waterways, so kind of during the Roman period, medieval period, people were thinking about waterways in the way that we do in terms of connecting them. They were navigating down rivers, so they were very much using water as a transport method. And then really this kind of gains more momentum, as it were, during the 16th and 17th century. So you get navigation improvements on rivers where you start to, locks start to be incorporated, weirs start to be incorporated as well. So you're really trying to engineer the rivers so that they can serve the purpose of transport. And then during the 18th century, this is when canal mania takes off, and lots of pioneering individuals really throw their weight behind canals, and it just builds and builds and builds. And the very early canals, lots of them are very successful. And people see this and they want a bit of cake. They want a bit of that action too. So they get involved, and that's really how it goes. And it gets to a point where you've got so many acts being passed through Parliament that they don't all get built. And there's some very speculative canals that really would never have worked out anyway that don't get built as well. And then during the 19th century, it shifts a little bit. You get some big ship canals, and then you get, of course, the railway competition starts to pick up as well, which makes it more difficult for canal carriers to compete with the speed of the railway. And that does lead to some improvements in canal technology to try and compete with that. And then during the 20th century, you get the decline followed by the rise of leisure and restoration. So during the 1960s and 70s, as many of you no doubt will be aware and may have been involved with in some form or another, there are lots of restoration societies set up to push forward the restoration of canals. And if it wasn't for that effort, we wouldn't have had some of the canals we love today, such as the Calden, such as the Kennet and Avon. So then during the 21st century, this kind of push on restoration continues to try and bring back some of these waterways which are still disused and still in a state of disrepair. So that's just a bit of a brief tour of the history. So a little bit more in terms of what this means for how we look after it and some of the things that are important to understand. And certainly when we go out and look at things, it's actually, well, how was this constructed? We need to be aware of that. So canals were pioneering and were fundamental in the industrial development of the country, transporting coal and other minerals. They were built on sweat. They didn't use mechanical aids. It was all kind of physical, manual work, and they took years and years to complete. And the image that I really love is the idea that the very first stage of that was this the canal engineers going out and surveying the route. And James Brindley apparently went out on his grey mule, I think it is, and would go out and look across the landscape and think, oh yeah, I reckon a canal could get through there quite nicely, because they didn't have a detailed map of the land before they went out and surveyed it. So that was really the first step. So basically the canal beds and sides were made watertight by lining or puddling, and they were kind of trodden down by heavy horses, by cattle, to make it waterproof. So it's very much a system built around horsepower and manpower. And here I've just included some lovely photos of some horses pulling along some tugboats, and some kind of traces of what we've got left of this legacy. So some horse treads down on the canal in Walsall, some rope marks on the canal in Birmingham, and these kind of rope guards, rope marks, I just think are wonderful reminders of how the network used to function, and towpath, the name itself, and there's all these lovely little clues as to what used to fuel the waterway, which is wonderful, and all the curved lines on the bridges so that the ropes wouldn't snag. It was all local, not national development, and dimensions varied accordingly depending on where you were in the country, what you were trying to, what you were intending to carry, etc. So I'm just going to go through and we'll just discuss some of the heritage features dotted about along the canals. So starting off with reservoirs, so these are a really impressive engineering feat, and they're absolutely critical to supply water to canals and to help move the water about, essentially. The same with pump houses, it's the same idea of kind of moving and shifting and supplying water as and when you need it. So I've just included a photo of Rudyard Lake, which was constructed as a reservoir in 1797, basically to feed the Calden Canal and the Leek Branch. And these are a few pictures. I don't know if anyone's, well, there will be people perhaps local to Rudyard. I'm local myself to that area, and I walked past these little buildings here wondering what they were for years and years, and I was so happy when I got to go in them. And you go down and down and down for meters, and there's these great big pumps down there, so that's really interesting. We do have lots of really great reservoirs with really interesting architecture. None of our reservoirs are listed. That's not to say they're not of historic merit. It is simply to do with the safety around reservoirs. They very much fall into their own category because of the risks involved with reservoirs and the way we have to manage them from a safety point of view. So earthworks and embankments. This is something you'll see out and about. Early canals follow the lay of the land, whereas later canals you've got cuttings, and embankments were some of the first things actually made during a canal making process, because they needed time to settle and consolidate, and slippage was a constant problem for them. And indeed, you know, we've got embankments now that we have to keep a very strict eye on our embankments because of the risk if something goes wrong. And with cuttings, we have, you know, trees slipping down, soil slipping down. So we're still kind of battling with those issues now as well. Aqueducts. So this is the engine arm aqueduct, which is on the new main line in Birmingham. So the image on the left is from the archives. It's taken around 1940, and it's just this beautiful cast iron aqueduct. It was built by Thomas Telford. It's Grade 2 star listed in a scheduled monument. And up until fairly recently, it was actually on the Heritage at Risk register, sadly. But in 2016, we did a series of works on it. It was relined, you know, painted, etc., given a bit of TLC, and it's now been removed from the Heritage at Risk register. So that was good news. Locks, no doubt you're familiar. So this is Bratch Locks on the Staffs and Worcester Canal. And I just love this photo here. The black and white archive photo is just fantastic. And it just really shows the kind of the impressive feat that must have gone into building these locks. And of course, they're a crucial part of how we actually, again, manage the water flow to help the boats go up or go down, depending on what you're doing. And Bratch is a really good example of a staircase lock. Yeah, beautiful place. So you'll have to forgive me, I've just included some photos of my favourite bridges just to illustrate the point. We've got around 3,000 bridges on our waterways. So I'll just start at the image on the left, top left. This is Great Haywood Junction, where the Trent and Mersey meet the Staffs and Worcester. And this is Great Haywood Bridge. It's scheduled monument, and it's just wonderful. It's got kind of historic pavers all the way up and over it, so you really get a sense of its history. So that's a really good one. The one in the middle, these are the bridges at Bumblehole, which is in Dudley, and these are all made, they're all cast iron parapets, and they're all made at Horsley Ironworks in Tipton. And it's just a great site because loads of the bridges are listed. You've got a pump house there. So there's that one. And then the one on the top right is Milford Turnover Bridge. This is on the Staffs and Worcester near Milford in Stafford. And this is one of James Brindley's very, very early, if not one of the earliest, turnover bridges. So it's a great example of one of those, and it's grade two listed, but we're going to attempt to get it upgraded to grade 2 star because of James Brindley's links and the fact that it is such an early turnover bridge. So it's got potential that it might be upgraded, as it were, on the listed system. But again, you can just see the lovely curved lines here. So, you know, you've not got your ropes snagging as your horses move around. Just everything was designed to kind of channel these horses around, so you've not got the awkwardness of unhitching your boat, etc., as you're trying to navigate your way through. So tunnels, these are both images showing Harecastle Tunnel on the Trent and Mersey up towards Stoke, Newcastle area. So building tunnels was very dangerous. It was also very costly. They could never be sure if they were attempting to build a tunnel in the correct place or not. And they were very squat and low down. And James Brindley tunnels like these ones, they're very low as you go into them. So that led to kind of lots of talk and ghost stories and lots of imagination fueled by these kind of dark, damp, dire places. You can imagine some of the eerie sounds coming out of these tunnels. So I think it would have been quite an experience going through these tunnels, legging your way through them. So as I say, the image is Harecastle Tunnel, and this was the first major transport tunnel constructed in England. So there's those of you that maybe are familiar, you'll know that there's 2 tunnels actually at Harecastle. You've got Brindley's earlier tunnel, and then you've also got alongside, you've got Thomas Telford's tunnel. And basically they needed an additional tunnel because of the delays that were getting caused by this earlier tunnel. So for 100 years they functioned side by side, and it was a kind of one-way system. And now the earlier tunnel is no longer in use, and you go through Thomas Telford's tunnel, but you can still see James Brindley's tunnel. The image on the right is the portal at the northern end, and that's James Brindley's tunnel disappearing. But yeah, apologies, my images don't actually show the two alongside, which would have been useful, so sorry about that. So also dotted along, you will see lots of formal industrial buildings. This building on the right, you saw it earlier, it's in Warwick Bar Conservation Area, and it's the Banana Warehouse. So lots of links with trade, and in this area we've got lots of links with sugar, with chocolate, with tobacco. So there's lots of these remnants that are dotted along. Stables as well. Horses were integral to running the waterways, so they needed to be looked after as well. So the image on the left is Delft Stables, which I actually visited a couple of weeks ago. We're looking at possibly doing something with this site. It is one of the best surviving stables in the Black Country, so we're very eager to do something with it. You can see all these lovely stalls in there, and there's cobwebs kind of everywhere, and it's got a real lovely atmosphere which we don't want to lose, but we just want to make sure we look after you know, all the timber in there, and that we get it up and running. It would be really great to get some interpretation as well, so that people can actually go in and experience it, because it's a really interesting place. So that's Delft. And then over here on the right, we've got Broad Street Depot, which is in Wolverhampton. It's actually very, very near the train station. And at this site, there were originally 3 stable complexes that all would have been linked. So these bits here, if I can just find my cursor, there we go. I'm not sure you can see that, but this is the remains of where the stalls would have been, where the horses were kept, and there you can see some more of the evidence. But I visited this site with Nigel Cray, who was doing heritage assessment for us, and it was just great to kind of unpack it all then and there. But we'll touch on that one a little bit more as well. So how do we look after the heritage? So we spend a bit of time looking at deed plans and old maps, because it's really important that we understand what was there before. And sometimes, you know, you think you can work that out from the lay of the land, but it's not until you go and look at maps where you actually get a better idea. So these plans here are relating to the stables at Broad Street Depot, which we've just been discussing. And you can see here, the bottom right image, you can see this section here, this range. These were the stables, and it was only by kind of putting together what we found on site with these plans that we were able to think, yes, they were all stables. That's what was going on, because you know, you've not always got the evidence on the ground. Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's disappeared. So we rely on old maps and deed plans quite a lot to kind of inform our work, whether that be heritage assessments, whether that be commenting on planning applications as well. Archives are really useful to show how things have changed. I just love this image of Froghill Wharf. It couldn't be more different now. And it's just a reminder that, yeah, canals were really noisy, really loud places with lots of industry, lots of activity going on. And then here we've got Burslem Arm on the Trent and Mersey from the 1930s. Some of you no doubt familiar. It's no longer in use, and there are a restoration group, Burslem Port Trust, that are working on bringing that back to life. But yeah, sometimes the changes are just phenomenal. And also we do have architectural heritage surveys which were carried out in the 90s, and there's photos in those, and you look at them and you just can't believe how much places have changed, and that's since the 90s, let alone some of these older images. So that's a really useful tool for us. We work a lot with conservation specialists. So this chap here is Rowan. He's a conservation blacksmith. He does a lot of work with us on, he does tail bridges, that kind of thing. If we've got any ironwork we need looking at and repairing, he comes in and looks at it and recommends how we can repair it, essentially. And he does everything traditionally. lots of skill, and we rely on people like that so that we can use the appropriate methods when we're repairing some of our structures. We also work with conservation stonemasons, and also I think with this it comes down to using the right materials as well. So for instance, we work with furnace bricks because they coal fire their brick, which means you get that wonderful kind of dappled texture effect that you get when you with old bricks, because they've been coal fired, whereas modern day techniques, it's very much one dimensional, and you don't get that same texture, you don't get the same color variation. So if you're trying to match in with some old brickwork, you really want those bricks that look older and fit in a bit more. We work with volunteers as well, so image there of the work group with IWA. So we do lots of kind of on the ground brickwork repairs, etc., which is really helpful. And then we also work with universities. We have students that do placements with us. So the image on the right is just a screenshot of a report that was produced by a student about some of the peculiar bridge names on the old mainline canal. So it's really good to kind of tease out additional information that kind of day to day your heritage advisors wouldn't have time to focus on. We do a lot of training with staff and volunteers. So we do sessions around heritage awareness, around legislation, and we do sessions around working with lime mortar, because it is difficult to work with if you're not familiar with it, and it does need a skilled pair of hands really to get the right finish. So these images were taken a few years ago, actually inside the Roundhouse, doing a bit of lime training. And then, largely how we look after the network is just this kind of constant cycle of works and repairs and maintenance. We have to keep on top and look after this 200+ year old network, and it doesn't look after itself. So the image of the top left is in Bedford Street Lock 1, where we did a lock stoppage in February, and we actually did an open day as well. So we quite often go into locks and have to change lock gates, do brickwork repairs, sometimes deal with where we've got leakage issues, etc. And then we do kind of repairs as and when they appear. So the image at the bottom there, Bridge 102, that's on the Trent and Mersey. This was hit by a tractor, we believe, and just punctured this great big hole. Luckily, the coper hung on, but a lot of the bricks didn't. And it was a listed bridge, and we had some divers go in, and actually they managed to salvage quite a lot of bricks, surprisingly, that we were able to kind of use in the repair. And where we did need new bricks, we matched them appropriately. So that's the finished version. And then here, Bridge 82, that's in Salt on the Trent and Mersey as well, actually. So here you've got this corner repair, the bottom right corner, little brickwork repair was done there. And some fenders were put in as well, actually, because boat impact was causing that bottom abutment to erode and to be damaged. So compliance and reporting is a big part of what we do as well. So with us having so many listed assets, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're going about repairing things in the right way. And if something is listed, we may need to have that discussion with the local authority. We might need clearance for it. Might turn out we need listed building consent, and then we need to apply for that as well to make sure we've got everything in place for the works. We do produce a heritage report as well, which outlines, where we've had successes. It outlines engagement that we do with volunteers as well. But everything we do on the waterways, whether it's something for a structure that's listed or not listed, it does all come through our environmental appraisal system. So the environment team will look at it, I will look at it, and we make sure that we're happy essentially with what's being proposed, and we can have that discussion with the engineer and work out, is there something we could do differently here? that might have a slightly better heritage outcome, essentially. But, you know, we all work together and we are all working towards the same goal. So just to go through some of the challenges then, vehicle strikes is a big one for us. So we spend around £1 million a year repairing bridges which have been struck by drivers. In 2018 to 19, there were 85 reported incidences of damage to historic canal bridges. So the image at the bottom is Bridge 44 on the Caldon Canal, and this was hit fairly recently, this summer, and it's just caused that oversail, and it just meant the road had to be closed, and we've just very recently finished actually repairing that, because it meant that a lot of the parapet had to be taken down and rebuilt, unfortunately. And we've got some bridges that just get hit constantly, and for us it's trying to work with Highways England and local authorities to put in, you know, more measures if we need to try and prevent these things from happening, because, you know, it's not just the cost issue. It's every time it happens we lose historic fabric, and it's inconvenient for people if they suddenly can't, you know, go up that road. So there's a few issues with it, but it's nothing new. It's been happening for years. So the image on the right is a wonderful image on the Grand Union Canal, and a bridge strike on the A5 in 1939. And it's done a fair old amount of damage there by the looks of it. And I just love how you've got people gathered there trying to assist. Yeah, I quite like that photo. Graffiti is a massive problem for us, and heritage crime is a wider umbrella. So we're working on a heritage strategy at the a graffiti strategy at the moment as to how we actually can tackle it. Because, you know, we remove it, it comes back. We remove it, it comes back. It's just this kind of endless cycle. So, you know, we've got various stretches where we've actually done kind of a graffiti street art mile in a bid to try and encourage people to paint on different parts of the network that maybe aren't as sensitive and aren't listed and aren't historic bricks, which are very sensitive to certain types of paint, and you can do a lot of damage trying to remove some graffiti. So that's what we're going to be working towards there. And we also have coping stones stolen as well. So we are trying to work with the police a bit more, and we had training, trying to think when it was, probably the very start of the year actually, on heritage crime and how to work with the police, and what we should be reporting as well. So there's always more we can be doing to report what's going on. Health and safety is always an interesting one. You know, the waterway network is inherently dangerous in a way. You know, you have got exposed drops, you've got your locks, etc. So it's a constant balance, really, working with safety advisors on what we can do. And sometimes we do need to intervene, and we go out and we do safety heritage impact assessments, which weigh up kind of different options and what might solve the issue. The Ponty at the moment, there's lots of work around putting in a new railing. So sometimes we do need to go that extra measure and respond, and safety is always a priority. And it's just how you balance that without kind of doing damage to a heritage asset. So now I'm just going to go through quickly, actually, but we're getting there, we've still got time. I'm going to go through just a couple of projects just to illustrate some of the points I've been talking about. So the Roundhouse in Birmingham, this is one of our projects. It's going on at the moment. It's Grade 2 star listed, and it was built in 1874 after a architect from Birmingham, W.H. Ward, won a competition. And it was on the Heritage at Risk Register. It's a really interesting shape. It's this circular shape here. And it was a stables for working horses and a store base for lamplighters, storekeepers, sewage department and wheelwrights. And it was owned by the Corporation of Birmingham. So it's this wonderful stable building, just huge. It's absolutely huge. And we're working with National Trust We've got a partnership. We're still working on it at the moment, as I say. And the idea is it will be a bit of a hub that you can go out and explore the city of Birmingham from. So the roof has been repaired. They've been able to reuse a lot of the original slate, which is great, and we've matched it in where we've needed new slate. There's been repointing done on it. The original windows have all been repaired, so there were a few windows at the top. And something new, this window here, you can see it on the kind of artist impression. And there it is in real life. This was added in. This was a new window, and the thinking behind it was, without that, it's not really that linked to the canal, and we wanted to make it much more visible from the canal and feel connected, because it was connected to the canal through its kind of undercroft, but we really wanted to improve that visibility. So those windows that window was put in, so you can actually walk out and look onto the network. So it's going to be quite a good view from that when it's finished. And as I say, the project team are working hard to develop a programme of walking and kayaking tours as well. So it will be quite a place to go and visit once it's done, but it's just such an impressive building, used to house horses, and it just shows you again how important horses were for the network. And it cost 3.2 million, I should say, and that's money from National Lottery Heritage Fund and Historic England. So next we're just going to look at Blackbrook Junction Bridge. These are photos before we did the work, just to stress that. So it's this wonderful Grade 2 listed bridge. It was built in 1858, and it's one of the Horsley Iron Company bridges. It was in really shocking condition, as you can see. So you can see the top left image is what it was like before. It had been blighted by structural issues. There was great big cracks in it. There was graffiti on it. It had none of its copers. It had gaps in it. It was just in a shocking state, really. And there were lots of discussions around, well, we know what we're doing in terms of the structural repair, but what do we want it to look like? What do we want the finish to be like? And this is where heritage comes in. So I did an assessment which looked at archive images. It looked at the style of nearby bridges as well to try and make some design recommendations. So these photos here, I'm trying to think, I think they're from the 70s, if I remember rightly. But you can see, you may be able to make out, you might not, but there's some brickwork copers on these images. And that kind of gave us the confidence to say, well, that's what we're going to put back. And then the image on the right is a bumble hole where they have these stone copers, the stone coins going in. And that's what we decided to put back, because there was nothing there. There was nothing there. And here it had this brick infill, which you could tell was modern brick that had been added. So we decided to take that out and to put the stone back in. But again, it just shows you how using old images can really help inform some of the work that goes on. So listed building consent was required for this, and we put in the new stone there, you can see. So this was after we'd done the work. There's the stone waiting to be popped in. We did lots of repointing, we did graffiti removal, we put all these lovely half moon copers on. And we actually put in a patras plate to secure the bridge. So this wasn't part of the original listed building consent application that was submitted. So we had to actually go back, talk to the council and say, look, this needs further structural support, otherwise it's just going to shift again and twist. So we had to go back and make an amendment to the listed building consent so that was put in place. We also did a day of line training with the volunteers as well. Just an image here. The bottom right image is just doing a brick match with the brindle red to make sure that, just to make sure that where we are having new bricks, that they are appropriately matched, and making sure we're using the right materials as we go. So this Revolution Walk, part of looking after heritage, obviously it's the nitty gritty, it's the what you do on the ground with the heritage, but part of it is telling people about the heritage and getting more people to engage with the waterways as well. So there's a recent project that we've been involved with, Revolution Walk, achieving the Green Flag Award. It got announced last week. So this picture here, this is Galton Bridge. It's grade 1 listed on the new main line in Birmingham. And there's the section of the new main line and the old main line, which has now got green flag status. And part of that is telling people about some of this hidden heritage. So we've commissioned 4 interpretation panels, but there will be more. You can see at the bottom right, there's just a bit of a screenshot of what one of the panels will look like. So you can see there's there used to be a toll house there, and now it's just a lock. It's just an empty island essentially in the middle of the canal. So we're going to put an interpretation there that explains what that was for, how tolls, how gauging stations worked, how items were measured, that kind of thing. So yes, we do a lot of work around kind of letting the public know about heritage and trying to get people to engage with the waterway heritage as well. So going forward then, this is my final slide. We are working towards getting national listed building consent order for certain works carried out that the trust do, because a lot of our works are repetitive. A lot of the time we are doing gate replacements, etc. So really the idea is that we won't need to approach the council for certain types of work. I mean, obviously having a dialogue with the conservation officers is great anyway, and that will continue, but it's just trying to cut out some of the things we obviously don't need LBC for. It just makes that side of it a lot easier. It means consistency as well, because some councils do take a view, others will take a different view on certain works that we do. And it will be a partnership with Historic England as well, and it just applies to England, but at the moment that is working through the system. It did get delayed by Brexit, and then no doubt COVID is taking the forefront, isn't it? So we'll see how we go, and if we are able to get this, but that's the plan, that's where we're going. So thank you for listening, and I'll happily take any questions.
Kate, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and thanks for adapting your talk to the shorter format of a webinar. You managed to pack a lot into it. We have had quite an interesting selection of questions. So the first one from Stephen Cox is there an academic department in a UK university dedicated to the social and economic history of canals?
That's a good question. I'm not sure whether there is. I know that we've been involved with various universities in terms of them kind of putting studies together for us, in terms of looking at the benefit of waterways. And I know that we do have our own economic team that look at some of the advantages of waterways and trying to measure and put a kind of a quantitative value on people's engagement, if that makes sense, if that answers the question.
Yes, I know you referred in your talk to one particular study on the names of bridges, which is
yes, yeah. So we do work with the University of Birmingham a lot. This is just in the West Midlands I'm talking about. So we work with the University of Birmingham a lot in terms of their undergraduates, so people doing history degrees, etc. And we also work with Birmingham City University as well. So we have lots of students doing studying conservation. So they come in and they help put together heritage assessments as well. So it's really invaluable, the work they do. Actually, it's very useful, and it's useful for them as well, which is the main thing.
Great, thank you. Christine Bull has a question which maybe relates a bit more to your earlier position involved with restoration. Regarding the impact of the biodiversity net gain assessment requirements. I'm not sure if Christine is aware of this, but IWA actually has a webinar scheduled in a week's time on the 29th of October to address that particular issue by Alex Melson. So if anyone else is concerned about the impact of that on restoration schemes, then I suggest you tune into that. Gemma's offered to put the link to it, I think on the chat button. Also, through our IWA Restoration Hub, I know that we do offer some support to restoration projects with environmental surveys and habitat surveys, which would help relieve some of that pressure that Christine's referring to. Is this something that you've had any recent involvement with, Kate?
No, I mean, that's something for my colleagues, you know, for my ecologists and environmental scientists colleagues. So I think if people have got any questions, if they do tune into that webinar, that'll probably be better, because I'm not really placed to offer any advice on that, to be honest.
Okay, let's look at one of the other questions here from Neil Barnett. In relation to bridge strikes, he's wondering whether you could get Highways England to erect some sacrificial posts at either side of the road on the approach to the bridges, which are regularly damaged, and whether that might provide an effective solution where you're getting this as a repeated problem.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and we do work with Highways England, and there's a few instances at the moment where we are trying to get road restrictions put in, weight restrictions put in where there aren't them already, where we need signage updating, because sometimes the signage is actually unenforceable if it's, you know, not the right type of signage, etc. And yeah, certainly bollards and that type of thing is something that we're pursuing, and CCTV as well. We try and do that, particularly where you get in these kind of repeat incidences where you repair it and then 2 months later it's hit again. So yeah, we do try. We are trying to work with Highways England to rectify some of these problems.
And Ian Sessnan, as a follow-up, asks how often is CRT able to recover the costs of bridge strike damage repairs from the drivers and vehicle owners?
Oh, that's a good question. It'd be good to have a percentage, wouldn't it? I can follow up, because I'm intrigued now as to how many times we actually are able to recover the costs. So yeah, I can follow that up.
Certainly, if you have CCTV, that would be a big help, wouldn't it, to identify?
It would help, yeah.
Here's an interesting technical question from Robert Frost. What is a Patras plate?
Oh, a Patras plate. Okay, so a Patras plate basically goes through a structure. So if you imagine you've got your bridge abutment, and essentially you drill through and you pop your bit of metal. It's essentially a metal rod that you pop through, and you put a plate on the end of it, so it secures it into the wall. You pop your metal all the way through, and then you have another plate on the other side. So you probably will notice them if you look out. They're kind of just little metal squares sometimes you see around the place, and the ones at Blackbrook with these kind of black metal bits of material just kind of stuck on the end. So what they work basically by giving a bit more structure. So the problem we had at Blackbrook was just because of the lay of the land, the bridge was twisting over time. So it was just felt that if we repaired it and we just repointed the crack, it wasn't really going to fix it. So we needed to do something a little bit more invasive. So we basically put this metal rod through, and that just binds everything together a little bit more, essentially. That's my best non-engineering answer.
Brilliant. For a non-engineer. Right, Steve Wood, who I know has a particular interest in heritage, is saying, noting your comment about trying to get the roving bridge upgraded from grade 2 to 2-star. What's the reason for wanting to do this? And he said, we tried to get the straddle warehouse on the Colden that Cheddleton listed some years ago, and was surprised that it was rejected, despite it being a unique structure, and it's now definitely at risk. So what other approaches do we have that might help protect it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, Steve, if you mentioned it's now definitely at risk as well, it might be worth reapproaching the council because, well, Historic England, because part of the listing process does take into account, is it actually at risk right now from development or from falling over or whatever it might be. So it might be that the time wasn't right a few years ago, and now they might actually have a look again and think, actually, yeah, if we don't protect this structure, it is going to, collapse essentially, possibly. And then with regards to answering your question, in terms of getting it grade 2-star, it's just a little bit more protection for it, and it's just really about where you think there's a genuine case of actually this is a little bit more special than some of our other grade 2 structures. It's just marking it out in that way, and it does give it a bit more protection in terms of when people are thinking about heritage significance. So that's the reason for that.
Does it potentially unlock any additional funds for repair work or conservation?
It can do. It just depends on the funding stream. Some things are for grade 2. There are some funding streams that are more for grade 2-star. But it's just really about kind of engaging with it. It's a good news story as well. And it just means that we can do a heritage assessment. We can improve our understanding of what we're looking after as well. So there's quite a lot of advantages of kind of putting a bit of time aside and doing that work.
Thanks, Kate. Continuing this great variety of questions, Douglas Bridger asks, you mentioned the importance of horses, that they were the only form of power for the first century on board the canals. Are there any plans to encourage horses to be used on parts of the network so that the skills of using horses is not lost?
Yeah, I'm really biased because I really would love to get some horses in some form pulling some boats along the canal, because I just think it would be great. It would add a lot of colour to what we do, and it would really just help explain to people, look, this is why it's called a towpath. This was what it was all about. So I think at the moment, realistically, there'd be health and safety issues with that. We've put in place, some places there are railings where you've got access points and things like that, so it's perhaps not as rope friendly as it would have once been, but I'd love to think we could have that. I mean, there are places where there are heritage boats, and occasionally there are horse-drawn boats that operate, but it would be great, I agree, to do that a little bit more. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Now, Douglas Bridger is asking about the Revolution Walk and the interpretation boards that you mentioned near the toll island. Are there any plans to dredge and reveal the toll islands? Because he knows from boating past that they've nearly disappeared under vegetation.
Yeah, there are there is a lot of vegetation on it, and there's also one. There's another toll island just by Engine Arm Aqueduct as well, which again, it's got lots of vegetation on. So part of the plan is to expose part of it, go out with one of the engineers to have a look and just make sure it doesn't need any repairs as well, and just expose some of it so people can actually see the brickwork and see what it was. And I know it's something we're working on with our kind of environmental colleagues, because they might want to kind of leave some of the plants there as well, but we certainly want to expose some of it so that we can put interpretation boards on the towpath in places and people can look at it and understand what it was.
He also asked, are there any plans to reproduce the toll houses on these islands? I know a replica was built some years ago at Smethwick Toplock, wasn't it?
Yeah, there is that replica, which we're repairing at the moment, because it was subject to an arson attack, unfortunately. There's no plans to do that, but it would be interesting as a bit of a one-off, wouldn't it, just to pop that on the island and really show people what was there. But yeah, there's no plans for that at the moment.
Okay, right. Well, we've certainly covered some ground in these questions. Let me just go back and see if there's anything I've missed. Do CRT have insurance cover on bridges?
Well, we have general insurance, but I don't know what value it is, if that makes sense. I'd have to go away. I feel like that's a bit of an engineer or lawyer question. So I'd have to go and ask somebody who knows. But I would imagine we do, because we don't, it's a it needs to be in good repair, etc. But yeah, I couldn't give you a figure.
Another question from Christine Bull was, is there a danger that heritage overvalues buildings to the detriment of the canal? I wonder if she's thinking here about the fact that a lot of locks are listed, for instance, which could be a handicap if you were trying to restore those locks.
Yeah. It's an interesting balance, and it always is a balance. And conservation is all about managing change. So it's certainly not supposed to be a blocker to things happening. And when things are listed, you can do things to them. You can make alterations if you need to, but it's just making sure that process is followed, so that people are aware of what works were done, and if there's anything that could be done in a slightly different way sometimes. Sometimes you can achieve the same thing, but you've just gone about it slightly differently that's been less harmful. But you're right, we can't keep everything. And that's partly why the listing system and conservation areas come into play. And why we do heritage assessments, so that we can, fully understand if something is important, well, what's important about it, and what is maybe less important that we perhaps could look at changing.
So I think we've come to the end of our scheduled hour for this webinar. So, Kate, thank you again very much.
Thank you everybody.
Really fascinating insight into what you're involved with on a day-to-day basis, and we much appreciate the efforts that you and your team are making to conserve our heritage for us.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.